Did you know that something happens to many children of God? One day, they walk into a place, and they no longer see the same. They feel the invisible, the tension, the falseness, the emptiness disguised as joy. It's not sensitivity, it's discernment. God has removed the veil from their eyes, and now they see what others cannot. And yes, it seems like a gift, and it is, but it's also a burden. Because seeing through the eyes of the Spirit makes you aware of realities others prefer to ignore. You notice the hypocrisy behind a smile, the pride within a prayer, the coldness in the middle of a Christian crowd. And once you see, you can no longer pretend. This is where the danger begins. Because your light exposes the darkness that many have learned to hide. Your discernment makes others uncomfortable, and your presence reveals what's hidden. 1. The danger of isolation. The first danger of seeing what others don't is isolation. And I'm not talking about the simple loneliness of someone without friends, but the weight of living in a spiritual dimension that few understand. When God removes the veil from your eyes, He also separates you from the noise of the world. You begin to speak a language few recognize, to feel battles others don't perceive. And the clearer you see, the more alien you feel. I've seen many believers go through this. People with a pure heart who can discern the spiritual atmosphere the moment they walk into a room. They know when there's heaviness, when there's deceit, when someone smiles but their soul is screaming in silence. They don't judge, they just feel. But that clarity, that gift, often has a price: distance. Because truth makes people uncomfortable even within the people of God. Often, others can't stand that gaze that sees beyond. They'll tell you, "You're too spiritual. You see demons in everything. Relax. Not everything is spiritual warfare." But they can't understand that this can't be turned off, that it's not a choice. Discernment is not a switch, it's a holy burden. And when God gives it to you, you can't just close your eyes again. That's how isolation begins, when your vision no longer fits superficiality. When what others call normal, you recognize as dangerous. And though it hurts, that isolation is not punishment, it's preparation. Because before God uses you to see for others, He teaches you to endure being alone. 2. The danger of speaking or staying silent. The second danger of seeing what others don't is this: to speak or to stay silent. Because when the Spirit reveals the truth behind appearances, you face a quiet test. Should you warn or should you wait? If you speak, you might be wounded. They'll say you exaggerate, that you judge, that you see everything as spiritual. You'll be misunderstood by those who prefer calm over confrontation with truth. Many attack not because they don't understand, but because the truth you carry disturbs them. But if you stay silent, your soul splits in two. Because pretending not to see, when God has already shown you, is to deny the voice of the Spirit. And every time you deny what He reveals, you dim the light you were entrusted with. So you live in conflict. One part of you knows the truth, and the other must act as if it doesn't. That slowly destroys inner peace. Sometimes, discernment is not about speaking or staying silent, but about obeying God's timing. Because not every truth is meant to be spoken aloud, some must be guarded in prayer. And in that tension between saying and keeping quiet, the character of one who sees with the eyes of the Spirit is forged. If this message is speaking to your heart and you'd like to receive more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel Faith Unmasked. 3. The danger of rejection. And this leads us to the third danger: rejection. Because when you see with the eyes of the Spirit what others refuse to see, you will inevitably be misunderstood. Your discernment will be seen as criticism, your warning as judgment, your truth as a threat. And not because they hate the truth, but because they're not ready to face it. That's where the phrase "shoot the messenger" comes from. They don't reject you for who you are, they reject what you reveal. When you say something is wrong, they accuse you of lacking faith. When you unmask hypocrisy, they call you divisive. And when you speak with fire from heaven, they say you're exaggerating. But it's not you, it's the light you carry that unsettles them. Christ himself lived this. He brought clarity to the world, and the world rejected him because it loved darkness more than light. The same happens with his children. Those who see more deeply carry the weight of being misunderstood. You will be labeled, judged, and set apart, but that too is part of the calling. Rejection, in reality, is confirmation. Because if your discernment causes discomfort, it means you're touching something real. And though it hurts to be set aside, remember, God never rejects the one he himself has awakened. He uses that rejection to purify your intentions, strengthen your faith, and teach you that seeing clearly doesn't make you popular. It makes you useful in his hands. 4. The danger of confusion. The fourth danger is perhaps the most subtle and the most devastating: confusion. Because when God gives you discernment, you don't just see the spiritual, you feel it. And if you don't learn to filter what you perceive through the truth of his word, you'll end up carrying burdens that aren't yours. There are moments when you walk into a place in peace and leave in sadness without knowing why. You feel pain that isn't yours. You feel anguish over battles you never fought. And without realizing it, you absorb the spiritual heaviness of others, like a sponge that soaks up everything. Then you ask yourself, what's wrong with me? But what's wrong isn't in you, it's around you. That's the danger, losing the boundary between your spirit and others. Forgetting where your burden ends and theirs begins. And when you can't tell the difference, your mind becomes weary, your faith becomes clouded, and your identity starts to fade. You stop hearing God's voice because the noise of others sounds the same. That's why Ephesians 6 speaks about the spiritual armor. Not only to resist evil, but to remain firm in who you are in Christ. Discernment without covering becomes confusion. But discernment under the presence of the Spirit becomes power. So if God has given you eyes to see, ask him also for wisdom so you don't get lost in what you see. Because vision without an anchor becomes a storm. And only those who remain in Christ can see clearly without being lost in the darkness. 5. The danger of spiritual exhaustion. And the fifth danger, perhaps the most silent of all, is spiritual exhaustion. Because seeing what others don't see, feeling what others don't feel, and carrying what others ignore becomes heavy. The soul grows tired of being alert. The mind becomes overloaded with discernment. And the heart that once burned with heaven's fire begins to burn with weariness. Many believers with gifts of vision or spiritual sensitivity reach this point without realizing it. They start strong, praying for everyone, interceding for everything, discerning every atmosphere and every word. But little by little, they stop resting in God and start living on guard all the time. Their spirit keeps fighting, but their soul no longer has the strength to hold the sword. That's when exhaustion appears. Not because God is withdrawn, but because we try to fight battles that only He can win. We want to heal everyone, warn everyone, protect everyone, and we end up empty. The Lord never called us to carry the weight of the world. He called us to surrender it. That's why He said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Rest in Christ is not a break from ministry. It's part of ministry. Without rest, discernment becomes a storm. So if you see more than others, don't forget to stop and look up. Because even the most spiritual eyes become clouded when they forget to rest in the light of the Father. 6. The danger of spiritual pride. The sixth danger is perhaps the most deceptive: spiritual pride. Because after a while of seeing what others can't see, the heart runs the risk of being lifted up. You begin to think, Why don't they understand? Why are they still blind? And without realizing it, the gift that was given to serve becomes a measure to judge. That's how the most subtle trap of discernment begins. Believing that seeing more makes you better. You forget that it was God who opened your eyes, not your wisdom. And what began as an act of grace becomes contaminated with pride disguised as maturity. You become a judge of those who haven't yet awakened, instead of a guide for those who still stumble. Jesus saw more than anyone, but he never used his vision to humiliate. His clarity didn't make him proud, it made him compassionate. Every time he saw sin, he responded with forgiveness. Every time he discerned someone's heart, he responded with love. True discernment doesn't divide, it restores. Spiritual pride closes eyes faster than blindness itself. Because while the blind seek to see, the proud believe they've already seen it all. And at that point, the gift ceases to be light and becomes shadow. That's why, if God has entrusted you with vision, ask him also for brokenness. Because only a humble heart can sustain a divine gaze without becoming corrupted. 7. The danger of forgetting who you are. And we reach the seventh danger, forgetting who you are. Because in the midst of so much vision, intercession, and spiritual battle, it's easy to lose sight of the essential. You weren't called only to see, you were called to belong. You're not a restless watchman or a wandering prophet. You are a beloved child. When you see so much evil in the world, when you discern shadows and burdens, you might start to live as if your identity depended on what you detect. You become the one who sees, the one who prays, the one who warns. And without noticing, your relationship with God turns into a duty, not a delight. Your calling becomes a burden, not communion. God never intended discernment to replace intimacy. The purpose of seeing is not to make you a guardian of fear, but a bearer of light. Because seeing without remembering who you are makes you a tired watchman. But seeing from your identity in Christ makes you a child filled with peace. The enemy knows this. If he can make you identify with what you see instead of with the one who called you, he's already won half the battle. That's why, every time your eyes fill with darkness, lift your gaze and remember. You weren't called only to look at the darkness, but to reflect the glory of the Father. You are a child before you are a warrior. You are loved before you are a watchman. You are light before you are an observer of shadows. And when you remember that, everything falls back into place. Seeing what others don't is not a coincidence, it's a calling. God didn't open your eyes so you would live afraid of the darkness, but so you would be light in the midst of it. Being light is not just observing, it's also speaking when the Spirit tells you to. Because true love doesn't stay silent before sin, it confronts it with grace and truth. Our responsibility is not to please the world, but to reflect the Father. And if you must correct, do it with humility, remembering that you too were rescued from darkness. Speak the truth even if your voice trembles, because comfortable silence is also a form of complicity. And if, after warning them, they still refuse to listen, shake the dust off your feet, because you have already fulfilled your duty before God. If this message spoke to your heart, subscribe to Faith Unmasked to keep receiving teachings that help you see through God's eyes and walk as light in the midst of the shadows.